Hello and welcome back to the official Scottish Rugby podcast. On the show this week, we hear from Scotland Head Coach Gregor Townsend, plus, as it's Mental Health Awareness Week, our very own Ben Atiga.
Well, we are privileged enough to be joined by the Scotland Head Coach Gregor Townsend. Gregor, how are you?
Very well, Al. How are you?
Good, thank you. Lockdown treating you well?
It has been really good, actually. It's been excellent to spend more time with the family, my two boys, and obviously my wife Claire. And despite missing watching rugby and coaching, we're doing a lot of good learning as a coaching group. I think we're all hoping we can get back to the real thing very soon.
Knowing you as I do, although you say you're missing watching rugby, I bet you're watching rugby almost 24/7. Is there any homeschooling going on with the boys?
No, my boys are 15, 17. So Christian, my oldest lad, he was just finished up his school year, so his thoughts are turning to what he'll do next. Luke, the 15-year-old, he does school work every day. Or he says he does anyway, gets away into a room on his own. So no need for parental supervision there, thankfully.
What about training sessions in the back garden? Have you got them out running about practicing some of your new moves?
Yeah, well, they've actually got in a good routine, and they've obviously went well past my levels of fitness and skill. I decided that I'd try and get fit during this period, and I took on Luke a Bronco. You know the Bronco, Al? I think I ran against you.
You lost.
After you retired. I remember it differently. So I certainly lost to my 15-year-old lad, so I'll stick to the road runs.
Greg, you've had almost over 2 months now since the last match in the Guinness Six Nations. What have you been up to since then, behind the scenes?
Yeah, well, the initial period after the cancellation of that Wales game was us really reviewing the Six Nations up to that point. So whether it was what we did as a coaching group, as a wider management, and also the individual reviews of our players' performances. But since lockdown has set in, it's about how we connect as a group, how we connect with the players, and also the opportunity this presents itself to learn from others throughout the world. We're all in the same situation, whether we're a coach of a rugby team, a football team, whether we're involved in coaching education. So we've been really lucky to hook up with some really good organisations, really good teams, and people that we respect in the coaching world.
Any standout conversations from that, Gregor? Is there any sports in particular you feel as if that the either on-field or off-field learnings can really be shared into rugby?
There's lots. I think every session we have, we come away with something. And they've been varied as well. So it could be around just chatting with another rugby team and their coaching staff and what they do during the week, what has worked with them. It could be with a different team, or we hooked up with the Belgian football coaches, which was excellent. So a team that has obviously achieved a lot of success over the last few years. But even as interesting or stimulating for us was linking up with the Red Arrows 2 or 3 days before they fly past over London for the Victory in Europe celebrations. So finding out how they go about their training, how they debrief, how they work as a team was excellent for us.
They've got a similar system to the Turkish Air Force that I read about, where they strip back any sort of rank when they do their debriefs. Is that similar to the Red Arrows? That's
right. Yeah, they have a process that they've worked on for a number of years. That obviously has worked really well for them, where you go into a meeting room after you finish a training session or an event, and the leader starts by talking through the process, the errors he made, anything around health, around the safety of the flight, and everyone is got the same rank and the same opportunity to contribute.
You're going to know from working with you and playing under you, the one area that you are very keen on is giving themes to a season or a period of games, so that everybody has a kind of collective focus. Can you give us a bit of insight into what your theme was through this year's Six Nations?
Yeah, our theme this year was about staying in the fight, and we reflected on what we'd done the previous 12 months, including the World Cup, areas that we needed to improve, and also the challenge that lay ahead of us. We were starting with Ireland away, going on to England, two excellent teams that have been number one in the world over the last couple of seasons. And also beyond the Six Nations, we were going to be taking on the world champions in a two-match test series and then going to play in New Zealand. So it was going to be a big challenge. It was going to require us to be tough in these difficult occasions. And it was also a reflection on how we needed to be much tougher to be beaten. So at times over the last 12 months, we played some really good rugby, but we'd been inconsistent. And it was great for us as coaches. We got to link that staying in the fight with boxing. We got Josh Taylor, Scottish world champion, in to speak to the players. I know that the players were really stimulated by that. And I believe it got transferred into the way we play, from the Ireland game to how we came back against England in really challenging conditions to how we played against Italy and France. So it'll be something that we might look to build on or evolve the next time we get the players into camp, but it worked well for us in the Six Nations.
And just on the Six Nations, Gregor, we saw a number of players come into the mix for the first time, players like Kyle Stein and Nick Canning. Just a note on them, Gregor, and what you thought they brought to the whole tournament. Yeah,
well, I think the players did a fantastic job throughout the tournament, and they drove the group the longer we're together. And that was a new player like Nick Canning, who'd never been in the squad before, to the more experienced guys like Fraser Brown, Stuart Hogg, and Stuart McInally. It was great to see the growth of certain players throughout that period. Brilliant to see someone like Rory Sutherland come back into international rugby after having some real tough periods of coming back from injury, and do really well and relish each occasion, each opportunity, and play with real pride.
You spoke about the learning you've been doing over the course of lockdown, but I know you're a big believer in that from the players' point of view. You mentioned Josh Taylor bringing in different people to speak to the group throughout the course of Six Nations. It's a long Six Nations where the guys are together for a long time. What other ways do you try and break it up for the boys so they're continuing to learn and enjoy the process of being involved as well?
Yeah, that's something that evolves continually, and it evolves in discussion with the players, and especially the leadership group. There's been at times where we've maybe done too much outside of the rugbies in the meeting of getting people in, and there's times where we need to get that focus back and why we're here and the purpose during the season, especially after the World Cup. We had a good balance of the players training hard and really putting huge effort into that training week, but also getting an opportunity to rest and recover. And then someone like Josh Taylor to come in and chat was excellent too.
Well, one change you had for this Guinness Six Nations was you had a new skipper in place, and Stuart Hogg. You'll be working closely with him. You talk about the feedback that the players are giving you there. So I'm working closely with Hoggy off the park as well as on the park, and the rest of his leadership group as well.
Yeah, well, the leadership group worked really well, and Stuart, I thought, did an excellent job as captain. His first opportunity to captain the team over a period of games, and what was a real challenging run of fixtures with Ireland away first up. And I thought he led really well. If there's any mistakes he made, he was first to put his hand up, and that really shows positive signs of leadership to bring others with you. And I'm sure it'll be better for the experience. He really wanted to do the job. I know he'd done a lot of work speaking to others going into the job, and he's built up a lot of experience having played with some excellent players and in different contexts as well. So no, I'm sure he'll be a better leader for the experience.
Now we won't Gregor have a deep dive into every single game, but let's focus a little bit on that French game. I mean, what went before it was there was some great stuff. There was some disappointing stuff which should have brought in a huge amount of learning. But ultimately, what it brought in, what has been our last game so far in the Guinness Six Nations, was a brilliant performance against France. You must have been pleased with what the guys put out in the park for that 80 minutes?
Yes, obviously we always think we can improve every performance, but the way that we played in the first half really set the tone, and we were full of energy. We were tough in defence against a really confident French side, and we adapted at times too. So France changed their tactics and started to attack around the ruck a little bit more, and we had to adapt and counter that. And yeah, the red card made a big difference in the context of the game. But I felt that leading up to that moment, we were the team in the ascendancy, and it maybe held us back a little bit actually afterwards. I felt on reflection we maybe could have moved the ball a little bit more in the second half, but the weather that set in and obviously the scoreline were probably factors in why we didn't. But it was a great win against a very good side.
Player that had a big influence in that game. You mentioned the red card. He was involved probably for the wrong reasons, but Jamie Ritchie, and he's a guy in that game in particular, and we've spoken to him since on this podcast, who he's really massively stepped up in the last year. So he seems to be becoming a very key part of your back row. The way he plays the game, he's combative, he's in people's faces, but he's also got the softer touches as well. How impressed have you been with him over the last year or so?
Oh, super impressed. I think last year's Six Nations, he was outstanding, playing in the 7 jersey. Now he's playing in the 6 jersey and doing equally as good a job. He's got a really good all-round game. So the France match in particular showed his strengths around his link play. I think he was involved in both Sean Maitland's tries with the timing of the pass and angles of run. So yeah, we've been really pleased to see his development. He's now in a leadership group as well, which we can see as a benefit to him and a benefit to the rest of the team.
A young man to be in the leadership group, Gregor, but that won't be a barrier for you. If the guys are in there, the behaviours, the actions, the way they conduct themselves or where they need to be, there's no experience level that gets you into that leadership group. I take it it's about those behaviours.
Absolutely, and seeing how much influence they can have on others, their desire to be leaders as well, because it can be a lonely place at times. You've got to set standards rather than follow standards. And Jamie's one of a number of people that we see in the team with real leadership potential, and that has been a pleasing aspect of how the team's evolved this year. That whether it's that smaller leadership group or players like Sam Johnson, Ali Price, Adam Hastings leading meetings, talking about attack and defence. We're seeing players that maybe didn't speak up in the past really be comfortable doing that, and ultimately that's the environment you want to create. The players doing the talking, making the decisions, and being really committed to those decisions on match day.
So, Gregor, the Guinness Six Nations isn't over, and that France game was a great result. I'd imagine it would have been frustrated that you couldn't get straight down to Cardiff and get the game on, but that game is more than likely to be played in the course of next season. You've been involved in that before, back in 2001 as a player. What are your memories of that gap? Now, it worked out well for Scotland on that occasion.
That's right, yeah. It was foot and mouth back in 2001, and Ireland had 3 games to play. We just had one against Ireland at BT Murrayfield, and it was actually a very positive experience for us because we won the game. But playing in September in the Six Nations was an excellent occasion. It was good weather. Now I'd imagine our game against Wales will be closer to the November window than the beginning of the season. And I'm sure it'll be a brilliant occasion. Anytime you go down to play Cardiff for the Principality, it's one of the best atmospheres and occasions you can have in rugby. As a one-off game to end the Six Nations, we'll certainly be focused to build on what we've achieved so far this season.
Now, Gregor, we've reflected on the Guinness Six Nations, and looking ahead, we've now had the confirmation that the summer tests will not go ahead. Disappointing for everybody involved in the game of rugby. Just want to get your thoughts on that too, because I know how excited you and everybody were to get going and face the world champions and the number 2 team in the world.
Yeah, it's disappointing news, but it's inevitable. I think the longer we were in lockdown, that's now over 2 months since our players have trained as rugby players with a team. The time was just going to be too tight for our players to be ready. And obviously, with a 14-day quarantine, getting to New Zealand, it was just going to be impractical. I would say that it'll be a disappointment for the players. Touring's always a real special part of playing rugby, and to take on the best two teams in the world would have been a great challenge and a brilliant learning experience. So who knows if we'll get the opportunity to do it later in the season, but we understand the reasons why we're not going on tour anymore, and we just hope we get back to playing rugby soon.
That's the gap between international games, and this is a different set of gaps with the postponement of games. But the gap between international games is critically important from a national coach's point of view. I would expect to make sure that when the boys come back in, when the team comes back in, that you start again as high as you can on that kind of performance curve, and there's not a drop off to then get back up. What will you be looking to do, or what do you look to do in those gaps to make sure that the players and the squad as a whole come back together in the best condition as possible?
Well, the gaps are really them playing at the clubs and being competitive around their club performances and their training. And we obviously take a lot of interest and we take a lot of heed of what they're doing at the clubs, whether they have won their starting places for the clubs or performing well in the bigger games. And also anything that we've maybe highlighted to our players that we'd like to see more from them, whether we do see that in the games that they play. So I'm sure there'll be club games before we play international games, and when that resumes, we'll be watching how well they train, how well they play, and obviously we take into account how well they've performed as a team in the Six Nations, and that cohesion that they built up then, the understanding of our game plan, understand their teammates will be big factors too.
And is that the same, Gregor, as the ongoing? Are you in contact with a few of the players at the moment, talking CPD and I suppose the effective way that they use this period of lockdown?
A little bit. There are some players that we've got little projects with, but and pointing in the right direction of things to they can look at to carry on with their development. But really, this period it's about just connecting with players to see how they're getting on. We don't know when we'll be back training and playing games, and the important thing is that they're staying motivated and happy in their lives just now. It will be tough for a lot of them not knowing when they're going to be back playing and training. So that's the important thing, that we just keep connected.
And Gregor, just on that point around earlier on, you said, having that time at home with your families. I know the players and the coaches and everyone involved, the seasons are so long now and there's a lot of time away. When the players and coaches do get that chance to come back into the mix, there's definitely going to be a real hunger and desire. So what are the positives you can take from this extended break, maybe that being from a player welfare point of view or just from a hunger to get back going again?
I think it's unique to every individual. I hope that everyone sees positives in this situation. So it could be that you've got family and you can spend more time with them. That isn't always the case in a rugby career. It could be that you've are coming back from injury and it's a real good opportunity now to get your body right. It could be that just a break now gets a desire for you to play the sport you love. It rekindles that. There's lots of things that will mean that when you come back out of this, that you're going to do all you can to be the player you can be. So we look, all the players throughout the world in the same situation. I know, having spoke to guys like Johnny Gray and Darcy Graham who were injured during the Six Nations, they've got an opportunity now. Not that they're not missing games, and they'll be fully fit when they come back and playing. Someone like VP Nell, this break might extend his career. So I think if we cannot turn it into positives and make the most of this situation, and when we do get back to playing, we're better equipped to play better rugby.
One of the difficult things for the players, Gregor, and it's more from a club perspective, is they won't necessarily get the opportunity to play that last game that they thought was probably coming. You never know clearly when your last game's going to be, but an end part to everybody's season, regardless of whether you're going for the top spot or not, is the opportunity for players, coaches and fans alike to say their farewells to players. How difficult do you think that's going to be for some of the boys to deal with?
Yeah, look, from our perspective, not playing the Wales game was hugely disappointing for the supporters that were going down to the game. For us as a coaching group, just to sign off that season and carry on our momentum. Those that are retiring, it might be that they don't get the opportunity to play this season. It looks like we're going to roll in beyond June, July before we're playing again. So that is disappointing. But look, it pales in significance with the wider implications of COVID. So while it is disappointing to get these opportunities to play our sport, we all understand the reasons why we're in lockdown.
Gregor, this Six Nations saw you implement your new coaching team. Just talk us through some of the changes that you brought in, and now you've had a chance to reflect on them. What you've made of those changes?
Yeah, so we had two new coaches. So Peter de Villiers was looking after our scrum, and Steve Dandy was in charge of a defence. And first and foremost, it was great to work with those two people. They're great people, and they really integrated well with our coaching group, our management group, and with the players. They're passionate about the areas they coach. So that was a real positive. The transfer for what they were doing was evident in our performances and through our training. Defensively, I thought we fronted up really well, and we showed a consistency in that area, which is a credit to the players and Steve as a coach.
We talked about players moving on, but coach moving on, and Danny Wilson going into the head coach job at Glasgow Warriors. Gregor, have you had many conversations with him on a job that you know very well?
Yes, well, Danny, we've obviously known for a wee while that he'd be moving into the Glasgow job. That was all organised after the World Cup, so he can't wait to start that role. He's obviously been a head coach before and a successful head coach. It's a great club to coach, as you know, Al. Brilliant atmosphere at the games, a real connection between the supporters and the players, and a reputation of being a very tough team to play against, a team that plays some really positive rugby too. And I think Danny will build on that. And I know he's been doing a lot of work since the Six Nations at making sure when he does start that job, the players are aligned to his beliefs, but also he's connected with what the club's done in the past and what the club means to those guys in the city.
One thing that's been going on, Gregor, over the last few weeks from a Scottish rugby point of view is on Wednesday and Friday nights, as live games from the past have been going out. Have you been taken in? You've featured in quite a few of them, but have you been watching many of them? Yes,
I think that's been one real positive for us old rugby players. Watching old games. Obviously, from a coaching perspective, it was great to see some of the games shown, Glasgow Warriors games over the last few years, and the Scotland game. So, no, we've been messaging each other, teammates, of how baggy was your jersey, how bad a tackler were you. Can't believe you used to have hair. All the abuse that you've forgotten about for the last 20 years. But also, look, it's been great reminders that we've produced some brilliant players over the years. I was chatting to you the other day about Tom Smith and Scott Murray, just watching them playing again in that 99 season, how great they were. And Tom, there was another game of Lions 97 that he was outstanding, and even the game against England in the wet in 2000, Duncan Hodges' great game. Tom Smith was outstanding every time he wore that Scotland jersey.
What would Gregor Townsend, the coach, tell Gregor Townsend, the player?
What a question.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I think when you think back in games as an individual, you you obviously you don't watch a game every week, so the picture in your mind that, oh yes, I really defended well in that game, or my passing was really good in that game. Then when you watch it in detail, you go, oh well, that was worse, or that was slightly better. Sometimes you think that was a terrible game, and you go, oh, it wasn't too bad. So yeah, as I know, with the position I played in, especially, you're going to make mistakes. So there's always those errors when I watch back my performances.
I had Mike Blair, the coach, telling me as a player not to show Tommy Bowley outside from the 2010 game that was on last week. No, I wasn't watching it live, but Mike decided, as you say, sharing some messages, Mike decided to share in detail the mistakes that I made throughout that whole game, which was very good of him.
Yes, I did notice that as well. And you had long hair, Al.
Yeah, that's the other thing I'd probably tell myself is I should have cut my hair this short a wee bit before I actually did. I mean, I thought I had flowing locks, but when you look back, especially with some of the angles that they throw out, you then realise that maybe it should have gone a bit earlier. Jamie, I'm not looking at you at the moment, but like, just you take that feedback on board.
If you were new to the sport, or if you wanted to watch a good game of rugby, what game would you suggest that we show to get people excited or just enthralled about rugby?
Look, the one game, which obviously I'm a bit biased because I played in it, but I do remember a game, 1996, Scotland-France, where we were throwing the ball around and just moving France around the field. It was actually a close result then, but it could have been a big win. But that was a fun game to be a part of, and that would be good to watch. But there's been so many games over the last 40, 50 years. I love watching the 82 game Scotland-Wales the other week, and obviously the 84 game, the Grand Slam game. Great to be there as in person and watch back the games too. So no, I think this has been a real good period of just reinforcing our history, and that could be recent history, it could be games over the last 2 or 3 years that you could say you were there, and to watch it back again brings back real positive emotions.
You watch your games with the boys, Gregor? Do you make them sit down and watch how good their dad was? Yeah,
they don't tend to sit down very long, and I don't know whether they're just being independent boys saying, "Yeah, Dad, okay, we know you played for Scotland," but they also will point out anything. To be fair, they'll point out whether it was a good tackle or not. But if you certainly have had a dodgy pass, they'll rewind that and show you it again.
My daughter's continually asking me why I never sprinted in a game of rugby. She seemed to jog around a lot, Dad. It's like, come on, leave me alone.
Yeah. No, harshest critics, aren't they?
Yeah, although I'm the same as you, I don't enjoy watching them. Well, you watch them back with memories, and they turn out to be slightly different reality. And to your point, yeah, it's sometimes positive, but a lot of the time you remember maybe a big hit or something along those lines, which when you look back on it, maybe either wasn't a big hit or it was somebody else's big hit that you jumped on at the end.
Yes.
See, I don't believe that, Al, because a few years ago we did it was called The Captain. It was the end of your career. We did a kind of mini documentary about your time at Glasgow, and I know for a fact that you've got a DVD copy that plays in your car. So I know that's a lie. Greg, it's always great to get you on the podcast and to hear your thoughts on what you're up to during these unprecedented times. I'm sure we'll get you back on in a couple of weeks when maybe we know a little bit more about the rugby landscape and the fixture list. But thanks for coming on the podcast, and we'll speak to you soon.
Apologise for the Wi-Fi and the borders.
Cheers, Greg.
Cheers, guys.
Al, it's always great to hear from the head coach Gregor Townsend. The big news that we talked about with him there was the cancellation of the summer test, not just for Scotland. This is every rugby game in July. Just on touring, you've been involved in many. I've been fortunate enough to go on tours as well, so I know how important these are, not just to play rugby, but just from a team perspective. But if you could talk more in depth about what you got out of these tours and what the players will unfortunately be missing out on.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for clarity, the touring you're talking about the ones that you travel with the team and do a lot of the digital work, or are you talking historically with their orchestrals?
No, I'm talking with the... did we tour the Kestrels? Yeah, we went to Gala once.
Yeah, well, there's a tour in itself. We could have Gregor talking about that.
That was 3 weeks in Gala. It was good.
Seriously, though, the touring is one of the best parts, one of the biggest privileges. of playing the game. Now that for me doesn't matter whether it's an international tour or an Kestrels tour or whatever it is. It generally is some of the best teams you'll ever have. The focus is purely on the squad that are away, from the coaching group to everybody else who's there to make sure things are running as smoothly as possible. And there's something challenging about being isolated in that way. So you go to Australia, South Africa, New Zealand, and you're really there, and you're having to exist in your own little group. You can't rely on the same comforts, the same support that you have at home. So you have to become slightly insular in that. Now that's a brilliant feeling, because you end up getting to know people in different ways you would ordinarily not get to know them at all, and that's other players as well as I say, that wider group as well. It's also a phenomenal opportunity to see and learn from different people in different places. Like I look back at some of the tours that I was privileged enough to go on, and it was the rugby, yes, absolutely the rugby, but the opportunity to see the rest of that country, like Argentina, time we spent in Argentina away from the rugby, and just understanding a little bit more about how that country works was phenomenal. And
you mentioned the enjoyment of going to these places. What's the tours that stand out for you? What was your favourite trips that you got to go on?
It's really difficult because there's different reasons for different tours. My first ever tour as a 23-year-old with the national team was down to Australia, and that was back when we were playing midweek games as well. So it was my first opportunity to pull on the jersey.
Wasn't it?
Yeah. Although I didn't play a test. There was 3 or 4 tests. There was a test over in Wellington. The guys flew over to New Zealand to play a test, but that wasn't why I was there. For me, it was my first experience. It was learning from guys like Scott Murray, who Gregor mentioned. Phenomenal second row, a good mate of mine, and a lot of it came off the back of that tour. And then, for me, Argentina and South Africa, just phenomenal countries to tour. Climate, food, rugby, obviously, but the opportunity to enjoy the culture within those countries. The standout probably, if you're asking me which one I enjoyed the most, was my last tour. And we went to Australia, played a test match against Australia in Newcastle on a Tuesday night. We won that test match, and then we toured to Fiji and Samoa. And no top-tier team had been to Fiji and Samoa and played those games for many years. And it was challenging, and it wasn't the same comforts that you would always get if you were touring in other countries, but it was phenomenal. I mean, the passion for rugby was incredible. The heat in the game was dreadful, and I still remember it being one of the hardest games I've played in, just because of the heat and the humidity. Sitting at half-time in the dressing rooms, which were reasonably old school dressing rooms. Like there wasn't, your creature comforts. So there was no aircon, for instance, and I couldn't believe the heat in the place. I've got ice packs in every part of my body, just trying to get my core temperature back down, thinking to myself, I'm not sure I could go back out for another 5 minutes, never mind another 40. But you get through these things. So these are different challenges you don't experience in Scotland. So I think that tour stood out. That was under Andy Robinson. And it was a few of us. It was Chris Custer, myself, guys who were all coming towards the end of our careers. So we probably knew that it was one of our last opportunities to take in all the great things about touring.
Last question. The tour that's been cancelled or postponed, hopefully, we don't know that for sure, would have seen Scotland go to South Africa for back-to-back games and then travel to New Zealand. How important would it have been, or hopefully it will be, that Scotland get to play these top teams, back-to-back against the world champions, followed by the number 2 team in the world? How important is it that we get the exposure and we get the time to play these guys?
What brilliant challenge it would have been. I mean, to go and play the best teams in the world in their own backyard, it would have been phenomenal. It would have really tested where Scotland were. It was incredibly tough on the back of a World Cup year as well, because you've got to look at the amount of rugby that players have played. So I'm not entirely sure that Gregor would have taken the same team that started against France, or the same players that were in that squad on tour. I think it would have been an opportunity for some younger guys to get their chance. And wow, I mean, to go and play the world champions back to back and then drop down into New Zealand. New Zealand off the back of what they would see as an incredibly disappointing World Cup, and an opportunity for them to put some things right. So, yeah, from a rugby point of view, it would have been phenomenal. It would have been hugely challenging. But what a kind of stake to put in the ground to measure where you are. And as we touched on earlier, there's the other side of it. There's the learnings that you get as a player. You undoubtedly learn a huge amount. I remember touring New Zealand as an 18-year-old, just left school, but it was still the Scottish schools and youth team. And we were down there for 5 weeks, and you were in the heart and soul of rugby land. And I have genuinely never learned so much in 5 weeks about rugby. A lot of that came from losing games, because you sometimes learn a lot more from losing games than you do from winning games. But yeah, Scotland had an opportunity to go to South Africa and do something a bit special. They'll be disappointed, the players will be disappointed. But as Gregor rightly pointed out, the bigger picture at the moment has to be about making people as safe as possible, and that's the key messages that are coming out of World Rugby as well.
Big news.
Big news in this podcast. We've heard from her a few times before. She is not just a star on the park, but a star off the park. We are delighted to be able to announce that Rachel Malcolm is going to be joining us as a presenter for the next few weeks, months. Who knows? Jamie may no longer be with us further down the line. Rachel, great to have you on. How are you?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. It's great to be on. Thanks for having me.
Sorry, just to jump back in there with Al's comment there, but we don't know how long Jamie will be here. Something you want to tell me, Al? Is there an issue here? Or?
No, Jamie, we know integral, absolutely integral. Rachel's bringing a different dynamic to this. Current Scotland captain as well, which is absolutely fantastic. A real insight into what's live and happening with the players, both from the male and female side of the game, and somebody else to keep both of us in line.
Yeah, no, a great asset to have on the podcast, and we're looking forward to chatting with you, Rachel, in the next couple of weeks. About the Six Nations for you guys was just, how do you even sum that up? Because you just didn't seem to get a start.
Exhausting. No, it was, do you know what? It was an absolute experience, to be honest. And I think in hindsight, something that as a team, it was actually a really good experience to go through it. I remember back to the England weekend, so that would have been week 2 of the Six Nations, or what should have been week 2, but it was actually the end for us. And I was thinking, our game got postponed, thinking that was literally the end of the world. I remember us all being so dramatic about it, and we were all like knackered, and he like this extra day camp, we just can't hack it and all this, and we thought that was, we'd got through this awful experience that was going to make us so much stronger. And then lo and behold, Italy comes and we get woken up on match day, sent home, whatever. Then we get to France camp. Obviously France game gets cancelled, just one thing after the other. But I think seeing how incredibly both the team and the management and Scottish Rugby as a whole responded to every single challenge we faced was so incredible. And I think as a team, we've never been stronger in terms of the bond that we now have, because we've been through this very unique, I don't think any international team probably ever has been through quite an experience like what we had over that month, where it was just literally was just one thing after the other. And obviously from the outsiders looking in, they probably only see those big events, but actually within camp there was a lot more going on than what you probably hear of anyway. So I think to have that experience as a squad and not just as the players, as the management as well, actually has made us so strong and so tight knit. And I think as a captain, I've never been prouder of the girls in the squad and how we dealt with all that. So it was absolutely exhausting at the time, but there was a lot of laughs and a lot of fun with it. So yeah, it was an experience, that's for sure.
Well, joining us on the podcast now is former Edinburgh player and All Black Ben Atiga, also a valued member of Scottish Rugby. Ben, welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Good, thanks for having me, guys.
Brilliant to have you on actually in this week, because we all know what you do, Ben, but as it's Mental Health Awareness Week, I think it's really crucial that maybe you just explain to us, your role at Scottish Rugby.
I'm a player liaison at the union, and my primary role is to support our players and their holistic development. So we're looking at areas, we're looking at supporting the person rather than just the player. So in terms of areas around outside of rugby, that's where we kind of look to kind of provide that support at different ages and stages of a player's professional career.
When does that bring the players in? Is that from entry level into academies, or is it from domestic clubs? And does that include, I assume, the male and the female side of the game?
Yeah. So we when we first initially launched back in, I think, March 2018, I think it was, the program was designed to support our pro players, so all of our contracted players across Scotland. And that included, a handful of our women's who were fully supported by the union, and our Stage 3 Academy players who were also contracted to the union at the time. That's now, we've brought in Stuart Dow, who's now joined our HR department over the last year, where he has taken over, he oversees our women's team and our academy players as well. And so my remit really just covers our professional team, so that's our team in Edinburgh, Glasgow, and our national sevens players.
And the current situation we all find ourselves in, Ben, when players and staff are locked away. Their mental health is a hugely important issue, not just now during COVID, but out with that as well. But you must be working behind the scenes pretty hard, speaking to a number of guys. Well, what's going to be your messaging to these guys during this time?
So I've been able to get in touch with all of our players over the last 7-8 weeks. Just really checking in, reaching out to these guys, and just letting them know, look, I'm around, I'm still working. So if there's any support that you need from this end, just shout out. So really just informal chats. We've been keeping them to video calls as much as we can, just to kind of keep that social dosage going through this this lockdown. And that's been the most important part of the program through this period, is just making sure that these guys are looking after themselves, that they're practicing more self-care, they're looking after their relationships, people around them, over anything else. With the Rugby for Life program, it is around challenging these players to find that intrinsic motivation to find those interests outside of rugby. It is about supporting that transition to life after rugby. But at the moment, and I've had to, I've kind of learned this myself over the first, 6 weeks, just adapting to this whole situation and kind of thinking that, like, it's okay not to be busy, it's okay not to be working as much, because the whole world has basically stopped. And so I think that's the same message that the players need to know, is just to kind of not to be too hard on themselves. And so, that really the program has just been surrounded around just monitoring the players, just reaching out to them, letting them know that we're here if they need anything.
And you mentioned Rugby for Life. We'll come back to that because I know you've been heavily involved in that whole initiative. But I want to come to Rachel and Al. Just, Rachel, Scotland captain, and Al, former captain. How important is it that you have, regular discussions with teammates off the pitch, to keep that morale, just keep the conversation going? How important is it to have that dialogue?
I think it's massive, because you, as players, have peaks and troughs, and everyone does. And I think it's recognising that everyone's come at different stages in response to different things. So I think having a constant dialogue and a constant kind of outlet within your team and between the teammates is super important, to be able to recognise when each other's peaks and troughs are, and how you can help people. And Ben mentioned Stuart Dow, who's joined our programme this year, and he's been absolutely amazing for us in terms of just highlighting someone's maybe not quite right, maybe related to injury, something outside of rugby, and it just gives you someone to kind of flag it to and get them the support they need. And that's something we've not had in such a kind of official way in previous seasons, and I've seen a massive difference in the well-being of the girls and the happiness as well of the players as a whole. So I think it's really important to always have that dialogue. Yeah,
as Rach says, like it's massively important that dialogue's there. I think that the tough ones aren't necessarily the conversations that are happening, because the dialogue is generally good. It's when there's red flags. It's when somebody's a little bit quieter or going through a tough time that, to Ben's point about the ability to reach out and have those softer conversations, means that there is the opportunity to flag anything up. And I suppose, Rach, from your point of view, as a leader, as a captain as well, you'll play a big role in that and be speaking to Stuart regularly.
Yeah, I speak to Stuart pretty much at least once a week, even if it's just to check in and have a chat. But it's been a really good kind of support for me as a leader, to have that and have his support as a leader, but also have his support where I can recognise maybe things aren't going 100%, or the coaches might be getting something a bit wrong and from the player's point of view, and it's a bit of a kind of in between for me as well, so it doesn't always have to go straight from me to the coaching team, which I've found really helpful. So yeah, I think the work that Ben and Stuart are doing across the programme is really kind of showing the change that's happening within professional sport around kind of mental health and support for players.
Ben, you've been very open about your own experiences as a professional player. How important would it have been maybe to have something like Rugby for Life when you were a player?
Very important, obviously. But when I was playing, and we're talking like mid 2000s, back in New Zealand, the development program back then was still relatively new. Mental health as well, to an extent, had been neglected. Not so much just in New Zealand, but globally. It was more focus was around the physical health of players and people. So, I guess there wasn't as much information back then to understand what mental health was. But we had really good, I guess, equivalent to a player liaison back in New Zealand as well. Very fortunate to have her at the time. But again, mental health was relatively new back then to us, and obviously looked at such a huge stigma. And so at the time, probably even for myself, didn't really realise that it was going through tough times, because I didn't really understand it on the scale that I understand it in these days. And so that's what's really important about the program, is that we're now starting to bring that awareness to our players and trying to create that safe place for guys. Rugby for Life is a safe place for you to come and speak, speak your mind, to share your thoughts, to share your feelings. It's not such a soft thing. Being vulnerable is probably a strength. What you get out of it is the resilience that you build when you come out of that dark place. And that's a really important message for our players, and it's a huge part of why we have this program. It was the primary reason why we launched Rugby for Life. Everything else around career education pathways, personal development, professional development, understanding your responsibilities around being a professional athlete, all of that came after the mental health. It was all around how can we look after our players. And it's the great thing about Scottish Rugby is they looked at the duty of care to our players. Obviously, we haven't had that support in place before, and that's a gap that was identified and said, let's do something about this. Let's make sure we look after the duty of care of our players, and then everything else kind of evolved from there.
Obviously, as players, we kind of know that a big feeder into our mental health is around injury. What's the kind of message been to the players in lockdown at the moment who are potentially long-term injured and haven't got access to support? How are we kind of looking to support those kind of players?
So we have our medical teams who are in touch with our players regularly, as much as they can. All our players are now on furlough, so it makes things a little bit more difficult.
Yeah.
But our physios who are working at the moment are in constant communication with those guys who need it. And obviously with the lockdown regulations and restrictions, you can't physically be treating players. I think the most important thing is that the players know that, the medical teams are there if they do really need that assistance, and they put some procedures and protocols in place there. That's the most important thing for them.
Ben, we have a wide range of listeners, from professional players across the world to young players starting in the game. And, for anyone who's listening to the podcast who's maybe struggling at the moment or needs some support or advice, what would you say to them? What would be your message to anyone who may be looking for some support?
I guess to any of our younger players, our young teenage players as well, it's just know that whatever kind of struggles that you go through, we go through ourselves as well as professional athletes or professional rugby players as well. It's mental health that doesn't discriminate. No one is immune to it. No one has a protection bar against it. No one. So we all go through similar issues. The most important thing, though, that I've learned in my time, especially as a young player, is to reach out to someone that you trust, someone that cares about you, and someone that you are comfortable talking to about these kinds of things. And just know it's a normal part of life. It's as normal as a physical injury. A common message that I speak to players about is that no one seems to have an issue if someone rolls their ankle and goes to the physio and rehabs it back to full strength. Yet when we mention the word rehab outside of rugby, outside of the stadium, what's the first things we think of straight away? Rehab. Think alcohol, think drugs, think, all these sorts of things, these stigmas around rehab. But yet when we use it in a rugby context, it's completely normal. So we need to get to a place where we normalize this. This is completely normal, guys. And so, that's my advice to a younger generation, is to don't be afraid to speak out. It's actually the strongest kind of character you can have. You can actually build from.
I think what I'd add to that, Jamie, would be to be a good teammate as well. So sometimes when you're going through difficult times, it can feel like the loneliest place in the world. And the last thing you want to do is reach out, you protect it, you hide it. And we need to get past that, as Ben says. But to be a good teammate, to be a good friend is to make sure that you're aware of how other people within your environment are. So if there are any red flags, if somebody is looking as if they're struggling, reach out to them, but it can be in a really soft way. It's really easy to send a text message or WhatsApp or whatever to somebody who's done well, who's scored the try, who's kicked the winning conversion. But the ones that mean the most are the ones that you get when things have gone badly. And you get that after every single game that I've played in on social media or even friends, that if things have gone well, you'll come back in and there'll be 50 to 100 messages. If things have gone badly for you as an individual, there'll be 5 or 6, and it's those 5 or 6 people that ultimately mean the most to you. It's those 5 or 6 people that have taken that time to reach out when things have gone badly. They say, I'm there for you, or give me a ring, or you'll pick up back next week. It can be anything. But for me, those are the most important messages, and those are the ones that help me and will stick with me throughout my career. So it's clearly about individuals. It's clearly about making sure we get past that stigma, but it's also about that wider teamship. But to be a good teammate is to make sure you're there for people as much as you possibly can be.
Well, Ben, thank you very much for your time here on the official Scottish Rugby podcast. Mental Health Awareness Week is a crucial time for everybody involved in the game and out with the game. So we appreciate your advice and your knowledge, and stay safe, and I'm sure we'll speak to you again soon.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ben.
Cheers.
Well, Alan Rach, it was interesting to hear from Bennett Singer there around mental health and what he's been doing behind the scenes to support not only our players but people across a wide spectrum of Scottish rugby. Rachel, we'll come to you first. He mentioned Stuart Dow. Now we know he's been brought in, and you touched on how important it was having him involved. But if you just elaborate a little bit more on the benefits of having somebody like Stuart around.
Yeah, I think it's really important for both players and staff, and because it just kind of gives almost an in-between man to kind of bounce things off in terms of what's going well, what's going maybe not so well, and it just gives you a little bit more of a voice as a player to have someone to speak to, and for him to feed that back in. And it might be to do with rugby, it might be to do with completely separate rugby, but it just gives you someone who's completely separate to selection, to coaching, and whatever else, which is super important. And on the topic of mental health, having that kind of independent person there that you know that you can talk to in confidence is really important as a player. So he's been brilliant for our squad this year.
Yeah, I think, Rachel, your point on having that, that voice, if you like, or somebody who will listen away from performance is key. Like for us, a lot of the time it was the medics. So the relationship you build up with the medics, the trust you've got in them because of the way you have to kind of present yourself to them as well. You've got to have a completely open and honest relationship with the docs and the physios, and that's where Stuart and Ben come in as well. It's making sure that honesty can be there, knowing that you have got full trust in what goes with them will stay with them. For us, we had different mentors as well. Personally, work with people away from rugby. Internally, we used to try and make sure that every academy player that came into the programme was paired up with one of the senior pros, and it's just asking the questions that you don't necessarily want to go to the head coach with. And some of them are the silly questions, or what you might deem to be the silly questions, just about learning how it is to be in that environment, and the more expertise we can put into these places, the better.
Yeah, really useful to have somebody like Ben on the podcast and his wider team of Stuart as well. A great asset to Scottish Rugby.
And finally, for any of those looking for any more information, please search the hashtag Mental Health Awareness Week.
That's all from us this week on the official Scottish Rugby podcast. But joining us on the show next week is current Scotland captain Stuart Hogg.